As soon as the script was done, and it took me a little while to find a team of producers who understood what it is we were trying to do, and there was a lot of opposition to the idea that there could be a movie that was about older people, that was actually starring older people, and I got a lot of feedback about. I got a lot of people pitching me younger actors. Saying, like a younger man can lose his wife. And it's true, but it was really important to me that this was a movie that really truly depicted people who were the age that I'd written, in their 80s. Because I feel that most actors in that age group are kind of relegated to playing like kooky grandpas, or and when there are more serious stories about more serious issues, they tend to be seen through the eyes of younger characters, like through the children who are tasked with dealing with their aging parent or grandparent. They're almost never from the perspective of the person themselves. And so I knew that because this was, it's not an easy story. It is about things that are uncomfortable, which is that we will all grow old, and that it really needed a huge star to kind of counter whatever emotional resistance there would be to encountering these feelings. So I also felt that it needed to be someone, ideally it would be someone who was a giant star in the golden era and whom had not made a movie in a long time, so that there was a bit of a feeling of it being an event. That also mirrors Max's story in many ways. He had his glory days in another era, and now he's dealing with what life is like after that time. So the list was narrower and narrower, and even though I had been thinking about Jerry when I'd been writing, like you said, I'd been told that he was retired, and I couldn't find an alternative. I just couldn't find anyone else who kind of checked all these precise boxes. So we kept trying to figure out a way to get to him, and we were just constantly shut down. And we were getting ready to give up, and finally, I think it was Lawrence Ingley, one of my producers, who said, we haven't just Googled him. So we started going online, and we found that there was an office in Las Vegas called Jerry Lewis Films. And I figured this number's probably been disconnected for 25 years, but sure enough, someone answered, and it turns out that this is basically the office that is responsible for handling the business of being Jerry Lewis, which is a big business. So they were, the woman on the phone was not encouraging. She said she gets calls like this all the time. People send scripts, he doesn't read them, he doesn't make films, he's retired, don't bother. But we sent it anyway. And while we were waiting, he received his honorary Oscar, the Humanitarian Award. And I remember sitting in front of the TV thinking, first of all, he looks amazing, and because he hadn't been photographed in a long time, so there was a bit of a mystery, what his health was like. And he'd been sick; he'd had pulmonary fibrosis, and he looked incredible. And I thought, this is the closest I'm probably going to get to him. And about 2 weeks later, he called Lawrence. I remember him saying, "I got a call from my assistant. I've received 3 messages from Jerry Lewis today," and he got Jerry on the phone, and Jerry said, I didn't think I was going to make another movie, but I read your script, and now I know I got to give him one more. And he committed right there on the phone without even meeting us. And then we were off and running.
Wow. What do you think it was that gave him that confidence to, believe in you and believe in the film? Because he probably had so many offers, over the years.
Yeah.
That he kind of turned down.
In some ways, it's not for me to say. I mean, I can tell you what he's said. He has said that he very rarely received material that was in this kind of dramatic arena. It was mostly comedy, and he also has said that when he was sick, when he was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, he was told that he would likely not survive, and he was put on a treatment for which the odds were very low that he would make it, and he did, and he was very surprised. And I think he felt like he had this extra chapter in his life that he wasn't expecting to have, and wondered why and what he might do with that time. And I think it may have rearranged his relationship to work a little bit. And so in some ways it was probably really good timing, that we were in the right place at the right time. And my guess is that one day he said, all right, let me take a look at some of these scripts that are coming in. He got that itch. And there was one that was not a comedy, and that may have appealed to him, and he read it, and I hope it moved him. I think it did. We talked very early on about the one thing that could really make this movie go south is if anybody tries to act in it. Those are his words, in fact. I believe, and I've been lucky enough to have gotten to know him very well, and it's one of the benefits of how long it can take to put a difficult movie together sometimes, is that you have a lot of time to get to know each other and get close. And we use those years wisely. We use them getting to know each other really well. My belief, and I think that he would agree, and I think the people who are close to him would agree, is that Max Rose is the only time that he's ever allowed the real Jerry to be photographed, to be filmed. Look, King of Comedy is my favorite Martin Scorsese film. I love it. I love Jerry in it. But I think even Jerry and Scorsese would acknowledge that in some ways it is a caricature of Jerry Lewis. It's not the man. He really let us see the real him. And when he read the script, he used to joke to me that I had hidden cameras in his house, because he would say, I don't know, you wrote me, I don't understand how you knew exactly who I am. And I can't explain that either. I was, I'd never met him. I didn't know what he was like. And I was just writing the character that in many ways was inspired by my grandfather. And they are very similar in a lot of ways. But at a certain point when you're writing, when you really get in the zone, the angels are whispering in your ear and you're just taking notation, it stops being yours and it starts being, something that you're in service of. So whatever power there was behind this thing was really writing Jerry Lewis through me. And when he read it, he felt that it really struck a chord. He felt it was him. Well, just the novelty of taking off the mask is shocking to fans of a famous clown. But it's not the first time Jerry's done that. He's taken the mask off before. I think he took off all the masks on this one. He took off the clown mask, but then he even took off the masks that he has, behind that mask. And he's very raw, and it's, at times I think it's hard to watch because he's this guy who is so larger than life and is almost like a deity to people who love him and have loved him all of their lives. And he really let himself be seen to be fallible and to be a person that has real issues and real problems and real struggles, and it's hard to be that age. It's difficult. Your body is not your friend, and he let us see all that stuff, and it was incredibly brave. Part of being a director is just being sensitive and being on your toes and really understanding what it is that each actor needs from you. And sometimes what they need from you is nothing. It's to just get out of their way. And sometimes they need for you to just be a support. And sometimes they need for you to really craft the performance with them. And at the end of the day, your job is to do whatever they need to get the movie right. And Jerry is so experienced and so aware. He's a very, very self-aware man. And anyone who hasn't gotten their hands on his book, The Total Filmmaker, should absolutely do so immediately. It's out of print, unfortunately, but it is the finest, one of the finest books on directing, I think, that exists. I spent a lot of time with him, and still do. But he splits his time between San Diego and Las Vegas, so they're both close to LA. So I would drive out like once a month, roughly, or every 2 months, and I would spend a weekend with him, or a day, or a night. And a lot of that time was spent just talking about his experiences as a filmmaker and as an actor. He talks in his book about the concept of an internal government, and what he means by that is that each of us has many different people inside. And in his case, that kind of split personality is, he's built a career on it. So he's a movie star, he's a dramatic actor, he's a comedian, he's a producer, he's a director, he's a philanthropist, he's an entrepreneur, he's a father, he's a husband, it just goes on. And what this internal government concept is that he talks about is that there is a kind of superego governing the whole thing that looks at whatever situation is at hand and says, okay, this is the one that you need to put in the cockpit right now, this personality. And we would, when we were having those conversations about his films. Remember once we were talking about The Ladies' Man, and he said, you know, I covered him in a choker, but I also always had him in a wide because I don't know what the hell that crazy idiot's gonna do. And I realized that the he was referring to was Jerry Lewis, the actor. That Jerry Lewis, the director, talks about Jerry Lewis, the actor, in the third person, because when he stops directing and he's set all the cameras and he's designed the scene, he completely forgets about the directorial design and he just goes. And he knew that about himself. So that superego would say, right now you're the director, and then at 10:47 and 36 seconds, you're the actor. And it works for him. So he's all those people, they're all inside of him. I think, you know, every film one makes, one learns more about the process and hopefully gets better and better. I think there was a very specific lesson that I learned about filmmaking on Max Rose, and you know, I'm far from the first person to say that writing and editing are essentially the same endeavor. Is that there are certain films that I always make a distinction between story and plot. Plot is you've got the microfilm and you're on the train that leaves the station at 12:37, and if I don't get it from you, you're going to give it to the bad guys and the bomb's going to go off. That's plot. Story is how I feel about all those things. And I think that certain films are more plot heavy and the story is more incidental, and other films are more story heavy and the plot is more incidental. And Max Rose is the latter kind. There's almost no plot at all. It is almost entirely made of the subtle nuances of human interaction, of human behavior and emotional dynamics, which was always the design. And I think that those films are the most challenging to edit, because you can't just rely on story event, or I guess I should say plot events, to move your narrative forward. What you're relying on is performance, because that's where the emotion is, that's where it lives. And it requires you to look very closely and to be very patient, both as a filmmaker and as an audience. That, you know, it is a much more intimate experience. And it can take more time. You know, Max Rose famously, you know, had a very long journey from wrap to release, which is where we are now. It was 3 years. And a lot of that time was spent in the editing room experimenting and, you know, saying, the subtlest moments of, you know, how does this facial expression dropped into this scene change the scene? And when that scene changes, how does it change this block of time in the narrative? And when that block of time changes, how does it change the whole thing? And so, and because there's no science behind human interaction and human emotion, it's really trial and error. It's just trying different things and going, that feels right. It's much harder than, you know, the Avengers, where, you know, which, you know, it has emotion in it.
Alfred Hitchcock type of scenario where you're kind of one shot leads to another, and it's all related to the plot, as you said.
Yes, yeah. You know, to me, and I am also a producer, and I produce movies that are often more plot driven, and I love those too. But for me as a director and as a writer, it's the emotional stuff that is interesting to me. And so if anything, despite how hard Max Rose has been, it's fortified my desire to continue making those kinds of movies. Last night I was watching Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, which is one of my favorite films. Great example of I really, you know, I'm 44, I grew up in the 70s, and I long for the days when movies like Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, or An Unmarried Woman, or Kramer versus Kramer were blockbusters. Those were the films that mattered to people because they were about everyday human problems. They were about divorce and marriage and being parents and being children and aging, and those were the big ideas. Those were
also like big studio films with big stars.
That's exactly,
very surprising. You would never imagine that today.
Never in a million years. All of these films that we just listed today would probably go straight to Netflix. They would, and they would have audiences, and they would, but you could carbon copy those films, even potentially with stars who are at that same level of visibility, and they would not reach a wide audience. And you know, I don't know why that is. I'm sad that that's the era that I live in, but I am absolutely determined to keep making those movies. And if that means I only get to make one every 10 years, which is how long it took to make Max Rose, I'm okay with it. But those movies have to exist. They have to exist to counter all the other stuff. This era of escapism that we live in, you can't blame the people. They go to what they want to go to, and they are in charge of their own lives, and they get to decide when they want to have an experience that takes them out of their reality and when they want to have an experience that takes them deeper into their reality. That's their business. But I hope that in my lifetime it will cycle back at some point to a period when people are more introspective and more interested in growing, and or I should say, challenging themselves to grow, because that is ultimately what film is supposed to do, and at least for me, is tell you stories that reflect back on your own life and help you hopefully confront something that you were struggling with and make a little headway with it.